Welcome once again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain, which is definitely what we're going to try and do today, because we're going to get into some complex things, speaking generally about experts and what an expert is, and how do you judge when you've got dueling experts. How do you look at data yourself? And then we'll get into some practical example. We said last time we'd talk more about fitness and specifically about programming around the 6 elements of fitness that Sam talked about last time.
Yeah, just a reminder, those elements were muscular strength, muscular endurance, cardiovascular endurance, mobility, flexibility, body composition, and then again, I call it mental toughness, but you'll hear a lot mindset or mindfulness on that. And we need to go into that in more detail, because I think we did have a little back and forth, and I think there was a misunderstanding there last time. I'm speaking more of the effects of your mental state to your training and your daily life, and how it can sabotage your results versus just being, getting in your zen and all that stuff. So if we have time, we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But yeah, what it means to be an expert. Are we experts? Maybe.
You are. I'm not. I don't even know what you'd say. I am knowledgeable on the subject matter. I would not call myself an expert, because I think expertise requires a lot of detail. To me, expertise is detail. It's detail and specifics about a topic.
See, I'm gonna go a different route with this. I kind of figured you'd go that direction. I think it's one of the biggest misconceptions out there. I think one of the reasons we can talk about a lot of different subjects is the similarity between the two. And we need to draw a distinction between an expert and a specialist.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So if you want to talk an expert, it's someone with a lot of knowledge and can convey that knowledge to the public. If you want to talk a specialist, they have a lot of knowledge about a very narrow subset of skills. And when we talk IQ versus other traits in an industry, I actually have the opinion that a lot of high IQ people are wasted on being convinced to become specialists.
I think another difference to me would be a specialist not just has a lot of knowledge, but has a lot of experience in that narrow field.
Exactly, because you can overcome an intelligence deficit with repetition, but repetition takes time. And so if you give an industry an example, is there's a local orthopedic surgeon, and he is amazing at what he does when it comes to getting in there, cutting the person open, repairing an ACL, and getting back out with as little scar tissue as possible, and at a better recovery outcome because of the good work he does. But when he starts giving post-rehab advice, he sucks, because he's so good at the repair process that he hasn't had time. I would say maybe he does have time, but he hasn't been able to spend the time professionally to get a broader look beyond that knee and ACL. Or I think he does rotator cuff surgeries as well. So beyond that labrum, or beyond that torn supraspinatus tendon or whatever. So he can get in there and he does that super well. Whether he's just kind of a highly specialized mind and he can only stick to one thing mentally, which some people are, and they get very good at it, or he just doesn't have the time to pursue outside of that box. So I've done about 12 post rehabs from the same doctor, and his work is amazing, but I have to tell the clients, let's deviate from his advice after that. I got a few clinicians that will back me up on this. Let's go through this post rehab program, because he does things like stick straight to the statistics, where The difference between your right and left leg is an indicator of ACL tears in athletes. So detrain the non-surgical leg so they match. That's also why we have a higher incidence of re-injury in the opposite leg, because now you're going out in a sporting environment because, oh, they match now, I'm released to go back on the field, and you've got a detrained leg on the other side. So we've got to spend the extra time to maintain in the good leg and then build in the post-surgical leg. So they eventually match. But at the same time, we're not doing it at the deficit of something else. It's equality of opportunity, not outcomes. Because outcomes can be forced by tearing one side down.
Yep.
By the way, as we talk fitness, go listen to our previous videos if you haven't, and start drawing the parallels. Because again, this is the difference between expert and specialist.
Yeah.
I attempt to be. I'll let somebody else name me at some point in time, probably 20 years after I'm dead. Hopefully somebody who was kind of a modern philosopher, polymath, what we call it nowadays, where my spectrum, I did not choose to specialize in anything, even when it came to fitness, because I wanted to help a broad range of people. And to me, I'm good at learning things, but I'm not very good at focusing on things. And I think a specialist needs that focus, whereas that person who can help a broad spectrum of people needs to have that broad, open mind.
All right. Well, then let's, where do you want to get into it first? Do you want to bring up the Cressey article?
Yes, we'll bring up the Cressey article. So one thing everybody could get a little better at is assimilating information. Whoops, wrong one. Sorry. Not that one. All right. Everybody should have an article that reads how to read a study. Is it up?
Nope.
Try that again.
It's all right. That happens at your age.
Is it up?
Yep.
Okay. So this is by a man named Eric Cressey. He runs a few very well-known strength and conditioning facilities on the East Coast, and he is also technically the head strength coach for the New York Yankees now.
Oh, I did not know that.
And I only knew it because I have a client that plays for the Yankees. So, but he wrote an article in 2021, how to read a study. We're going to kind of just hit some of the finer points, but if you want to read the whole thing, you see the link at the top. Pretty easy, ericcressey.com, how to read a study. Well, first, tell me what you got out of it, and then I'll go into the nuts and bolts.
A couple of things. First off, something I would add to his why you should read a study. As he says here, you don't want to, because he's talking in the realm of fitness, and there are a lot of fads. I mean, all you have to do is watch a little late night TV and see the commercials and infomercials for dieting products or exercise gadgets or whatever. And you know that there are a lot of fads in the fitness industry, and they all cite studies. They all cite studies. Okay, well, are those studies worthwhile? Are those studies valid? Do they have flaws that they're obviously not going to tell you about because they want you to spend money on their stuff? So from that perspective, that's why you should learn to read a study, because you should check that stuff out, because some of these things are a little pricey. So in general, you should do that because you don't want to be misled on something. Something else I would add is if you know how to read a study, then it will help you. It will help you take less time in the future. Because, for instance, one of the reasons we've mentioned Cressey before, and one of the reasons we go to him is because we know how to read studies, we know how to evaluate data in this regard, so we know we can trust his expertise.
Yeah, because
So
we've spent the time checking his sources when we
exactly.
were getting to know his stuff,
And
and he checked out, for the most part, most of the time.
and so, something another reason we trust him as an expert is because something we've mentioned kind of before is uh a reliable expert will tell you when they don't know or when they've changed their mind and
Mhm.
why. So I've read stuff of his before where he says, I used to go with this, but now I do this, and here's why. I feel I was wrong before, and here's why. So if you can get to where you know how to check someone's sources, then it will let you find people you can rely on in the future. So now, I just, if I get a Cressey article or that I read and I go, okay, well, I'm going to apply that. I'm going to use that. And I just go right to it. I don't have to say, okay, well, let me dig in here. What studies is he citing? What is he talking about? Let me go there. Brett Contreras is another one. I watched a bunch of his videos the last few weeks, and he cites a number of studies in his videos. But I trust him enough that I don't have to go digging up those studies and take a look at them.
Well, and it's not something you even have to do all the time.
Yeah.
Once you've gotten a few people you can trust, you just do it every once in a while, and a lot of times that's out of curiosity. It's like they'll say something that just kind of makes you look sideways at it, and they'll cite their resources. If they're good, they'll cite their resources, and you can go look at that and say, "Wow, I was wrong about that." Before you ever even said something, out loud, you have to take back. Or
Right.
sometimes you look at it and you go, "Well, I see the same data as this person, but for some reason I got a different message out of it." And
Right.
that happens a lot, and that's where public debate comes in. And I do like to listen to these guys' podcasts too, because they do debate people on these subjects.
Mm-hmm.
But also when it comes to going across subjects, it's what I did when people started bringing the social justice stuff. I downloaded the stuff, took it apart, and basically analyzed their sources. So if they said such and such based on this database said this outcome, then I went there and studied it. And you're just looking at databases, you're looking at studies, and these same techniques work across all disciplines. So you might not be thinking fitness, you might be thinking nutrition, or even medicine. One doctor tells you need such and such procedure, you get a second opinion. Another doctor has a completely opposite uh, opinion on the matter. Well, how do you pick which one to listen to? You could go get a third opinion, spend all the money, or you could say, well, why did you say this? And ask the other, why did you say that? And then compare the two by checking their sources. And the first indicator would be if they can't give you a direct source. That's the first one. That's your Yahoo article. Studies say this, and they don't link the study.
Yeah.
If they don't link the study, I pretty much automatically throw it out or just take it with a grain of salt. And then the other part is, okay, they do link a study. Does it say what they said it said? If you, and that's where we're going to go into this article, because he breaks it down into the different parts of a study to read. First is the abstract. And unfortunately, this is where most people don't get past. And this is where most of your journalists don't go past, because they'll read the abstract, draw a conclusion, write an article, and then just go from there. But after that, and he goes into more details about what it takes, what each part of it is. But the first place I usually go is the methods, because I want to see what kind of study it was. Did they randomize it? If they did what variables did they control for? What did they not control for? A good example of that is there was a bunch of protein versus high protein versus high carbohydrate diet studies that came out late 90s, in the 2000s, as things like Atkins and stuff were coming forward, and a lot of the nutrition industry wanted to cut those things off. and they did a lot of carbohydrate versus protein studies, but they didn't control for calories. And if you don't control for calories, the total food intake, obviously you're going to get a result that's not representative of one versus the other. Multiple meal versus 3 meal versus fasting studies did a lot of that too. They didn't control for activity, or they didn't control for calories, or even I saw one on belly fat and fasting, and they did. First of all, it never got past rats. It was only a rat study, which is a start. Don't throw out rat studies. Rat studies are a start, or other animal studies are a start. But we have to at least say, well, does that work in humans on something
Yeah.
you can?
And that's again where I think you look for experts you can trust. Is experts you can trust will with something like that say this study suggests. Okay, that's an
Yes, that's a
important
key
word to
word.
me.
Yeah, that's a key
Yeah.
word.
So if it's a rat study, okay, well this suggests we can extrapolate into humans that may be. But if you see someone speaking definitively that this is this, well, no, that's not what that is. And scroll down a little bit to abstract, because I want to. Why you?
Let me add to your statement there real quick,
Okay.
because that's where the next part that I just highlighted there comes in. Discussion. So now you should see in the discussion a lot of questions. So we found this in this population, or we found this in rats, or we found this with this protocol. So why did this happen? What are the mechanisms? And how could, the key question here, how could this be different with XYZ different situation? I'll go back to that one rat study, and this is why I wanted to go here, is we've got a rat study that showed they increased abdominal fat with a fasting protocol versus a non-fasting protocol. But there's two big variables there that I want to discuss, and it never did, but they wanted to sell you something, so they quoted the study. What was the diet composition? Rats are typically a grain-fed diet, which is also linked to higher body fat. And what was their exercise protocol? Did they jump on a wheel? Were they allowed to exercise? Were they in a high stress environment where they're being handled a lot? Because now you've got a grain diet plus a fasting protocol plus a high stress situation where they're being handled a lot. And so now we've got a lot of different variables to say, well, what if we fed them a higher protein diet with a fasting protocol? Is it different? And that's where we ask, if they don't ask all those questions that could be questions that could debunk what their conclusion was, then they basically are just trying to drive a conclusion.
Right, because as you've said before, and this good science, like good anything in your life, because you can apply this to pretty much anything in your life, the goal is or should be to be less wrong. So a good study will ask these questions and point out these gaps in their work, because what they're trying to do is either say we're going to look at this next, or prompt other people, okay, this is where we need to go from here to be less wrong. We need to take this data and these conclusions to this next place so we can be less wrong, so we can increase our understanding. But the abstract, the reason you jump to methods, and I think you probably do this instinctually.
Well, I do read the abstract first.
Okay.
I do read the abstract first because it's an outline. And so if you read the outline and then start picking apart the details.
But
yeah,
see,
go ahead.
But that's because you are a study nerd, a science nerd, that you've dug into a lot of these. I mean, your bathroom reading material is professional journals where PhD people are writing studies and putting them out there to be peer reviewed and stuff like that. But see, here's where I'm highly suspicious of abstracts, and why your point about, journalists or someone who's just trying to make a point will just read the abstract and draw conclusions and go from there. The problem with that is that what an abstract is supposed to be is what he says here, is a brief summary that covers the main points of the study. The problem is if if the study is being done by a biased person to make a biased point, that will show through in the abstract.
Mhm.
And since I'm more of a public policy nerd, since I've been into politics so long, that's where you see this a lot. So one place where you really see this is climate change papers. If someone is trying to make a political point with a climate change study, that will show up in the abstract and or their conclusion. Okay. And you see that a lot. That has been a criticism of the IPCC reports a lot, is that and because if it's like a large group project, a lot of times the scientists themselves don't write the abstract and the conclusion. A lot of time so like with IPCC studies, you will have a bunch of climate scientists come together under the auspices of the UN, and they will put together their work, and they will put up their data and their conclusions. But then somebody else will come along and write what do they call it, the policy paper or paper for policymakers, and that will basically pretend to be an abstract or a summary of the data in the study, except it won't. It will be what the people writing it want it to be. And so that's where you need to jump into the methods and say, okay, well, is the abstract, are the conclusions they're drawing, are what they're saying this study is that really what this study is?
I'm going to give an example from advertising. 9 out of 10 dentists recommend X brand of toothpaste. And how can 5 different companies make that claim and truthfully make that claim? It's because the study done asked, whatever number divides by 10 to get a big in value. List your top 5 recommended toothpaste. And inevitably the top 3 or 4 brands are going to be in the dentist's top 5, maybe with an outlier here and there. So if 9 out of 10's top 5 included X brand, then you can say 9 out of 10 dentists recommend this brand, because you ask what 5 brands would you recommend. And so 5 different companies can use that same thing, because they're probably the 5 most common brands out there, and dentists are going to, most toothpaste are the same. So they're going to recommend something with a lot of fluoride and tastes good, makes your breath nice and minty. So that's a way you can skew a statistical analysis without knowing the methods. If you knew they were supposed to list their top 5, then your conclusion at the end is, oh, well, they're all the same, basically. Those 5 most popular brands are the same. Whereas if they had to list their top brand and really think about it and not rank order them, then you're probably going to get 3 out of 5 recommend one brand, 3 out of 10 recommend one, 2 out of 10 recommend another, etc. And that doesn't make for good marketing.
No.
And so you look at the climate science, and this is something that is actually done. The survey where you get the 97% climate scientists, or they don't even say climate scientists, because it includes meteorologists and regular polymaths and stuff like that. 97% of scientists believe we're destroying the world, basically. It was surveys like, has climate changed since 1820? Yes, or somewhat, a lot, a little, or not at all. And anything between a little and a lot is counted as yes. And then, do you think humans had anything to do with it? A lot, a little, somewhat, or none at all. And anything between a little and a lot is counted as a yes. And so 3% of people are delusional, that think nothing has changed and we had nothing to do with it if it didn't change. But 97% understand that over time the climate has changed and we are not innocent as humans. That's a lot different discussion than the world is going to end in 10 years.
Mhm.
But they're using the 97% to encompass all of it.
Right.
So I think as far as this paper goes, that's the main thing we wanted to bring forward. Look at the methods. If you don't know how to read them, well, I'm going to give you a little bit more insight on that here in just a second, but then also the discussion, because in a discussion, there should be a lot more questions than answers. In fact, there really should be no absolute answers. And if you see anything that is a direction and action, it should be we are recommending this based on this data, but we really should keep exploring.
Mhm.
What I wanted to move to after that was our levels of evidence. So you're talking about studies, that's how to read one. When you go into the methods, they should state what kind of study it was. And as we look at the levels of evidence, going towards the top of that pyramid there, the more fine-tuned and accurate it becomes. And which means this, let me take that back. That was a bad way of saying that. The more, the stronger the evidence is. So down at the bottom, it is evidence. And if it's all you got, then you have to go by it, which we have expert opinion down there, which is a common buzzword around now. Listen to the experts, listen to the scientists, listen to the science.
And let me pause you right there. Is
Yeah.
Again, from my politics nerd perspective, the reason this is so important is because, I mean, obviously not everyone can be an expert on everything. It's just there's a knowledge gap, there's an IQ gap, and then there's just a time gap. You've got other things to do. So one of the most annoying logical fallacies that crops up in public policy debate is what's called an appeal to authority. Okay, so now there's a difference between citing a study and then citing a study and saying shut up. Okay, and that's what the appeal to authority logical.
I'm going to go one
fallacy
step
is.
forward with what we're seeing is, I'm the expert. Here's what I say. Shut up.
Yes.
No
Yes.
citation needed.
Exactly. Okay. Well, no, hold on. That's when you cite a source, you're saying, this expert says this. This is why it's important. This is why it applies here. It's not this expert says this, the end. That's not how this works. And when you get into public policy, and you've got an example you're going to bring up in a minute, is you will often have dueling experts. Okay, well, I'm not an expert on infectious disease. So if I've got two experts who disagree talking about COVID policy, public policy, okay, well, that is something I can weigh in on. I'm not going to weigh in on the infectious disease part of it, but I can weigh in on the policy part of it. So I need to know which of these two dueling experts do I think is more reliable.
Well, you brought up, let's go back to fitness. You brought up Brett Contreras earlier, known as the glute guy, by the way. He's the foremost butt expert of the world. And then we got a man named Stuart McGill up in Canada, Dr. Stuart McGill, who's considered probably the foremost back expert in the world. And if they were to get together and have a debate on what we should be doing with our hips, which involve the low back and the glutes together, for the foremost way of creating an environment to have a strong and robust system in that area, and they were to discuss it with differing point of views coming from different backgrounds, that would be a discussion that benefited the whole world, especially because they would do it respectfully and they would present their information. And then usually as things fall forward, they'll end up convincing each other on finer points and kind of coming to a married argument, even though they have different specialties, but kind of the same goal. And what they would do is bring forward information along these different rungs on this ladder, and the person who had the stronger information would basically kind of win out on the finer points. No one's going to win the total argument because nobody knows everything. And if you got the two foremost experts in the world, a lot of times they're going to be they're not stupid, and they didn't get there for no reason. So there's going to be things that they disagree on that may be a little give and take here and there. And personally, with the COVID discussion, I feel like we've been done a disservice because we've been denied that.
And I think the real reason is something you just said there that I think is key, is win. Because in your McGill and Contreras example, I don't think either of them would be trying to win. They would be trying to present their case and further the science, further the understanding of the topic. But because it was immediately politicized, like everything is these days, every COVID argument, whether you're talking about the scientific part of it, the infectious disease part of it, or the public policy part of it, every argument is someone trying to win. I have yet to see a discussion or debate on the topic where people are trying to convince and explain.
Yeah, and public debate is probably the best way to do that, and the moderator is important. I think people have, I think the American public has a skewed view of what debate and moderation is because of our presidential debates.
Oh,
those are not real debate with real moderation. It's you say your thing, and everybody just decides which one's lying more.
And you try and score points by making the other guy look dumb and getting yourself some good sound bites.
Where in a scientific debate, or what should be public policy debate, is the moderator should be trying to clarify everything for the audience. So first of all, you're moderating, so you're controlling the flow, giving people equal time and all that, the timestamps, that's important. But also, someone makes a statement, this exercise is the best for your glutes. Elaborate. I don't think it's the best for your glutes. Elaborate. Give us your sources. Okay, so then it goes back to the first person. Now, they've stated why you're wrong, rebut their argument, and then you rebut the rebuttal, and you just keep going back and forth until it's clear to the audience which one is more right. Or if it could be a wash. Or it could be dependent on your goals. I want a big, strong butt, and I don't care if my back hurts a little bit every day. Well, you're going to have a different result than I don't want to deadlift a car, but I want to get up in the morning I want to be able to tie my shoe without having to do this afterwards. So that's individual choice. So which one worked best for you and stuff like that. So that's what we were denied with a lot of this, and we're denied in presidential debates too. But in just the public square in general. The public square should be a place of respectful and well-moderated debate. I'm going to give two other visuals on this exact same thing, but I'm going to come back to the pyramid because I think it's the best one. Here's a real basic hierarchy of the different levels of evidence. Again, one being the best when it comes to just pure information, and then getting a little more muddy as it goes along. And that doesn't mean these aren't good, because sometimes they're the best you got. And then this one is a deep explanation of what kind of studies fit into those categories, and then what qualifies them to be there.
Yeah, and again, the reason this is important is because I don't have to be a climate expert or an infectious disease expert or pick your example. Or we've been talking about fitness. You don't have to be a fitness expert if you're just someone who wants to get in shape or whatever. Okay, you don't have to be able to understand these studies necessarily, but if you can understand the different methodologies, then it will help you pick out which are the most reliable studies.
Well, and the limitations that go along with them and what you have to consider. A good example of how one of these near the top, like a number 2, single randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard of studies, how that can be limited. I'll go back to that rat study. It was limited because they're only looking at one variable in a certain population. So now if you go to a different animal than a rat, you could get a different result. You go to a different nutrition profile than the rats tend to eat in a lab environment, you get a different result. A different exercise protocol. So now we're looking at resistance training versus cardiovascular training versus all that. Are you going to have that same belly fat result? We don't know. So that's a limit of a randomized controlled trial, is you're basically narrowing everything down to one variable. So all the other things that could affect it are not looked at. Now it's good for narrowing down something. So if I go through all these other steps, and I think, and my hypothesis begins to really fine tune to, I think this affects X affects Y directly, randomized control is the best, because then you can specifically eliminate all those other variables and say X to Y control to make sure that there's nothing random going on, and boom, X affected Y. Well, we just accounted for everything else. So it did it directly. So you can find a direct effect, but it's limited when you have other correlations that when you have multiple things that correlate to create the result. But at the same time, when you go all the way down to the qualitative studies, there's very little control. So a good example here is diet sodas make you fat. Well, you're looking at a lot of correlating things, and overweight people tend to drink diet sodas. So you can conclude with this correlation that, oh, diet sodas make you fat, even though there's no mechanism that goes along with that. Mm-hmm. So there's a limit there. You can draw a false conclusion from just something that correlates. What was it? The Japanese study, toaster ovens make you pregnant. Because people with families tended to have toaster ovens. And that's back when toaster ovens were kind of a household middle class and above luxury. So toaster ovens make you pregnant because people that have toaster ovens tended to be in a place in their life where they wanted to have children. So correlation versus causation, the more fine-tuned you get, the more you can actually directly attribute a cause, but the more washed out everything else that could be involved becomes. Now, number one is a systematic review of controlled trials. Now, the reason that's best is because it involves the controlled trials, but you're bringing a lot of them together. Yeah. So X affected Y, Z affected Y, W did not affect Y, all these different things, and X affected Y to this degree, Z affected Y to a different degree, W didn't at all. And now you can start putting all those puzzle pieces together to make a bigger picture again. So it really goes down to the pixel and then back up to a large picture as you go up the ladder here. So I think that's pretty cool. And if you learn how to see that, the systematic review is the best, and it's really the most useful.
Especially for non-experts. If you can find a review of studies, and know enough to understand what their methodology is, so whether or not you can trust this review, that will keep you from having to dig into the technical part of it that you may not be able to understand. Like I've said before, when I can't read a biochemistry study because the biochemistry will make my brain melt. Okay. But I understand the concepts enough to be able to read a review of biochemistry studies, right?
Well, and not only that, it's a time constraint. So yes, that person that did that systematic review spent probably their senior year of their postdoctorate work compiling all that information and putting it together, and then the writing it is the shortest part of the whole process. It's the putting it together to make a big picture that's the most time-consuming part of the process. Now, let's get to the COVID example on this. What Heath was alluding to was recently we had Senator Rand Paul questioning Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Senator Rand Paul.
Dr. Senator, yes, that's important because he's a doctor. We're appealing to expert opinion here. Mm-hmm. But he is considered, he's a doctor, he's a medical doctor, and Dr. Fauci, obviously everybody knows who he is. He's a doctor that is in charge of all our COVID policy at the moment. And what Senator Paul brought forward was a series of studies, but a few major ones, comparing reinfection numbers with people who have had COVID or who have had the vaccine. And he talked about masks, but I think we can broaden that to just living life in general. And what his evidence he brought forward would be right there at number 4. I'm circling there. Well-designed case studies and cohort studies. Not the best we can get, or not the best out there, but it's the best we have when it comes to COVID in this short time frame.
And a little over a year is a short time frame when you're talking about scientific studies, because these things take time, and these things take data, which again takes more time.
Well, and some of this stuff is new. We're talking immunization. I mean, we just started in December. And so when we're talking reinfection rates, well, you have to be exposed again. You have to go through that whole process, test positive again, et cetera. So those numbers are going to, but what it really comes down to is reinfection rate is, from having COVID, is 5 in the United States. Or maybe this was a British study. Don't quote me. Watch the Rand Paul video. It's either a British study or he quotes a British study in one part, and then he talks about US numbers in another part. So I might be getting these back and forth, but it's 5 out of millions. That's pretty dang good. That's better than the 90% effectiveness of the vaccine. But also reinfection from the vaccine, other than in those first 2 weeks where you're still vulnerable, is almost nil as well. So we've got a lot of data on that relative to what we had last year, obviously. Now Fauci came back and he started talking about variants, why we should still wear a mask, why we should still have limited capacity, why we should still not have restaurants open, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he brought up a South African study, which is basically nothing more than a case study at this point, which is on this model, the number 4 right there, which is, when it comes to actual studies, is the lowest level. The rest is kind of just observation. So at best, it's a number 6 on this. So when I'm looking at this debate going back and forth between the two, I've got one providing a lot of strong evidence, as strong as we have at the moment, with a longer term, with a lot more participation, because we've got population data to back it up. Whereas we've got one from a strain in a country where we completely different than the United States, by the way, as far as hygiene and technology and medical care and everything. And it hasn't reached the levels of pandemic that we're dealing with the COVID, the wild type. So he's bringing up variants to basically support policy on keeping things shut down and wearing masks, et cetera. Whereas the other side is bringing forward a lot of strong evidence. And being able to understand the difference between those two, well, now we've got a debate between 2 experts, and really one was lacking. And he rarely gives a straight answer on anything. So when you say listen to the experts, I think we need new experts.
Right. And because that example, it should make you think, okay, well, either this expert, because he's citing, he's focusing in and making broad statements based on lesser quality evidence. Well, either he's a dummy or not as much of an expert as he claims to be, or he's pushing an agenda, like our fitness examples of, making broad claims, and then you look at their evidence and it's a very weak study. Well, okay, you're pushing an agenda. You're just trying to sell me something. You're not actually trying to help me in this fitness arena. You just want me to buy your junk.
Which is why I hate that a lot of these subjects are politicized, because politics is sales.
Yeah.
and realistically, a global pandemic should not be political when it comes to the information we get, at least. So, I mean, obviously, if it reaches a certain level, if there was good level 3, level 4 evidence to support lockdowns and stuff like that, we probably should listen to it. But it's not there. And so we need to be seeing, we need this discussion to be played out on the national stage. Another, with the vaccine case, what, there's a man, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. He used to work for the Gates Foundation in pathology. I think by trade he's a veterinarian, but he's a viral expert, and he makes some very serious claims that our push to vaccinate during a pandemic is going to end up killing more people because it accelerates the mutation process basically like you would in a lab because it's going on at the same time. And he makes some very extreme claims in that regard. And then in a counter video, counter statement, Dr. Z Dog, if anybody follows him on YouTube, he makes a counterpoint claim. And there's a group of people out there trying to get them together for a debate with Dr. Brett Weinstein as the moderator, who's a biological evolutionist, as the moderator between the two. And I think that would be a service to the world if we could make that happen, because we have two extreme opinions on a very important subject. And just listening to both of their arguments without the other one there, it does look like the answer is somewhere in the middle. And I know Brett's a great moderator, so he would help guide that conversation to where us as the public could make sense of it all, even though a lot of the terminology and stuff would be over our heads. So hopefully that happens. And if it does, I will find a way to link it to everybody because we all need to see it. That's studies. Check out that Cressey article. Screenshot these
Yes.
these charts so you can kind of go over them and look into them a little bit more. And
so you can refer back if you're evaluating expert opinion, you want to be able to refer back and say, okay, well, what's their evidence? What are they citing? And how strong is it?
So do we want to go to programming from here?
Yes. Let's take a short break real quick. Okay, so like we said, practical example on what we're talking about here, because we're going to continue talking about fitness, and there's a lot of experts or so-called experts or purported experts out there that will tell you things, and you need to be able to evaluate what they're saying and then figure out how to make it work for you. And if you go back and watch some of our earlier episodes, we have been ahead of some things. Everybody's talking about the violence against Asians and the racial breakdown of violent crimes, and we were talking about that a month ago, our third and fourth episode.
Yep.
So we've been talking about that for a while, and so take that to the bank, sucker.
Hey, we were doing it before it was cool.
Exactly. And as far as programming goes, so Sam's going to give a breakdown on how to apply those fitness principles he talked about last time, and we're going to try and keep it as simple as possible. But again, what we're talking about here is we're going to be talking about kind of in generalities. And there are always yes, maybe, or yes, but, or well, it depends. Okay. And that's, again, where you find experts you can rely on. I mentioned Brett Contreras, and I've been watching a bunch of his videos lately to try and just as continuing education and try and figure some things out for myself. And one of the things that he will mention frequently is that, okay, well, this particular exercise, I'm not a big fan of it but people like it because And so if you're going to do it, here you go. And so he'll give you stuff like that. So you know that he's not giving you absolutes when he's acknowledging that there aren't necessarily absolutes, or he'll tell you, why to how to program and why and where that might not be applicable.
Well, I'm going to make the controversial statement that made me successful right off the bat here, and then we'll go from there. And this is where specialists get shot in the foot here, is you're not that special. One of the biggest mistakes, one of the biggest overused phrases in the fitness industry that automatically puts up my red flag that someone's selling you something is the principle of individuality. Everybody's different. I'm going to add a second one because they're related. Specificity. Those are two principles of fitness training, but they're the most overused by someone trying to sell you something, or someone who's just too lazy to do what they know they don't want to do. So you're not that special. We're all human beings. If we took a muscle fiber out of me, a muscle fiber out of Heath, and a muscle fiber out of, some little old lady walking down the street, they're going to be pretty much the same, other than a few things that are adaptable over time. The biochemistry that Heath calls witchcraft is similar across across human beings and really organisms in general. You hear we're 98% genetically like apes, which seems to contradict with the fact that I'm only 50% genetically like my brother. But that 50% is of the 2% that's different than apes. So it's misleading. But what is in that 98% is, the genetic code that makes hemoglobin.
Or an example I just thought of to maybe illustrate your point is, we discussed a while back that I could probably overhead press more than you, even in my weakened and broken state.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're different. Because simply Sam's obviously, he's a lot more fit than I am, and he could deadlift a heck of a lot more than I can. But I've always just had big strong delts, just genetically. Mm-hmm. But that's not going to radically change how and when and why we do overhead work, how and when and why we do delt work. It doesn't just that simple difference isn't going to doesn't radically change what's happening when we overhead press. It's just we have slightly different genetics that make me able to do that better.
Individuality works in that situation. But like you said, I still need to overhead press even though I suck at it. And part of it is just body shape, but part of it is I have a fused AC joint on this side from a childhood injury. I can't lift my arm higher than this. Well, you're not going to be very good at overhead pressing if you can't lift your arm higher than this. But I still need to do it. I still need to work the movement pattern as much as I can, whether it's limited, because I'm a human being and I move in that plane. So what I did as a younger coach, as I started to understand things, not when I first started training at 24 Hour Fitness, and I was an idiot, and I apologize to every client I had there. But when I first started learning the basics, what I learned to do was train in a pattern language. A good example of how this works is look at cooking. A recipe is exactly that. It's a set structure to follow. A pattern language is the actual cook who creates the recipe. So you know the rules of cooking, and you can adapt it to any situation. Look at the show Chopped, one of my favorite shows to watch, just to pass time. They give them random ingredients, and they know the rules of cooking, and they make something hopefully good. Whereas if you just, your best cooks don't know a lot of recipes and just keep making different recipes depending on what they need. They know the rules of cooking. And so what happened when I went back to grad school and started weaning away from CrossFit and 24-hour fitness days and stuff, is I started learning the anatomy of human and the principles of fitness, the principles of training and all of that. And okay, so now how do I take this human being and adapt them to where they want to go? And where they want to go is where individuality comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Individuality mostly, again, special circumstances aside, like post-cancer and stuff like that. For 95% of us, individuality mostly comes from past body exposure. Like I said, my fused AC joint, that was from an injury at some point, but in normal circumstances, I'd be able to lift my arm overhead. Preference and goal. So if my goal is to become a national level power lifter at 40 years old, I obviously have to train like a professional power lifter. And I sacrifice all the other things to go along with it. If my goal is to be a bodybuilder, I obviously need to eat and train like a bodybuilder. If my goal is to be a marathon runner, I need to do the opposite of those two. But if my goal is to just maximize my body as I age, well, all of those things marry together to a more less individual picture when it comes to training, because we need to address all of those 5, 6 physical fitness components, and knowing that any emphasis on one is going to sacrifice from another.
Exactly. And this is, I think that's key as we get into the specifics here. Because the reason we went on the long prologue of what is an expert and how do you evaluate expertise and data is because you need to just figure out what your goal is, but then you need to figure out, okay, how do you achieve that goal and what trade-offs are you willing to make? So you need to be able to look at different experts, different opinions, different data sets to evaluate that. Because what I see and drives me crazy going to a public box gym is that basically, and when you see it enough, you can tell, okay, that person saw something on Instagram or Reddit and they're just replicating it and they don't know why, and they're going to hurt themselves or they're not going to get what they want. And one of the things that drives me the most crazy is I've been doing hip thrusts for what, over a decade now that you got me doing them.
Mm-hmm.
And for most of that time, I've been getting funny looks. And so
one of the most underrated exercises, by the way.
I appreciate that you're seeing more and more people do them. Obviously, as a lizard-brained male, I really appreciate that the ladies are doing them, but you even see more men doing them now because, you know, the glutes are an important muscle group. So that's great. What I don't appreciate is, ladies, for the love of all that is holy, stop walking around the gym with a freaking glute band wrapped around your leg. Every day there's at least one, usually more than one. When I'm in there an hour and a half in this box gym, and sometimes at varying times, and it doesn't matter. There's going to be a female in there who is literally walking from exercise to exercise. They never take the glute band off from around their legs. And if you've just gotten your workout from some butt model on Instagram or something you saw on Reddit, you're going to think that that's going to make you look like an Instagram butt model. And it's not, because this is why you need to evaluate data.
Professional experience. And this is where sales comes into it, because sometimes the right thing to do and the marketable thing to do are not the same. We'll go down that route with CrossFit here in a minute. But the marketable thing and the right thing don't always coincide. And a great example of this is we would do those band walks, put the bands around the knees or the ankles and have them do their different movements, and you get that burn in the side of your butt. And all the ladies, we should do this all the time. That's the first comment that always comes up. We should do this all the time. And my answer would be, and everybody would know who trains at Real Fitness, because they'd be walking around like that. Because yeah, exactly. You would be patterned to just externally rotate your hip. And so there is a dose response, and my whiteboard is upside down because I thought we would do the other before dose response, but we'll go into dose response. So it's just like medicine. Again, similarities across fields here. It's just like medicine. Some is good. There's an optimal amount, and more is not better. And eventually more can end up being detrimental. So you end up, whoop, everything's backwards on the screen. You end up with a chart that looks like this. My improvement, dose, and as the dose goes up, you can hit an optimal amount. And there's a range there, and then it'll start going down. So when you talk about the principles of fitness, how much cardio is enough cardio? How much strength training should I be doing? Well, if you don't go by dose response and I want to get stronger, well, I could do 100 sets of 100 singles and I'll get stronger. But at some point, you reach a neural fatigue, you reach a muscle damage point, you reach a mental state where you're going to start getting diminishing returns on that. And so there's a lot of work been done on what's the best set and rep scheme to just get optimally stronger. Same goes for cardiovascular. Is a marathon what you need to be doing to have optimal cardiovascular health? Well, we see from the data that no, because they keel over from heart disease just as much as, if not more, than people who don't train. But there is a dose that does create kind of a range of optimal improvement where you're not damaging the tissue, but at the same time, you're making it better. And that's with all organic systems.
Yeah, a good example analogy here would be vitamins are important, okay, but you take a multivitamin once or twice a day, right? But vitamins are important, so why don't you take 10 a day or 20 a day? Well, because you instinctually or from data that you've seen that, okay, at some point you're just making expensive colored pee, or you're going to overload your body and it won't be able to handle and process all those vitamins, and you'll actually start hurting yourself. Well, the same applies to a specific exercise or a group of exercises. At some point, you're going to overload your body and create negative results.
I can go back to, we brought up the Stuart McGill and the back pain. One of the biggest complaints he has with working with clientele is he'll give his recommendation for do this to start the process of correcting your back pain. And he'll give whatever, I'm going to throw out an example. I think the example he used in his back mechanic book, which is a great book, Back Mechanic by Stuart McGill, for those that want, who have back pain and want to start, troubleshooting it. It's really easy to understand. It's made for real people. But says I'll tell them example 3 sets of 8 of exercise X. Say bird dogs. 3 sets of 8 bird dogs, and they'll come back. My back still hurts. It hurts more. And after interviewing, they did 8 sets of 15 because more must be better. And so he said the worst clients are the ones that won't do it, or the ones that overdo everything you tell them. And so there is a dose response, and professionals, obviously you have to go to the experts because we can't know everything. But I think Heath's point here is when you see it on Instagram and the person has a nice butt that does it, don't think that just more is better. So that's the main thing with dose response.
So then what should you do? And this is where we should go into why you've got your little dashes and blocks back there of, okay, so what should you do to not only get optimal results for whatever your goals are, but then keep those principles in balance?
Yeah, and I do this with clients. This is kind of where I start. So you have the 5, we'll talk about the 5 physical principles of training. The mental part plays into all 5. So it's kind of a separate category. It's kind of an over-encompassing category, but you have the 5. And if you have a perfectly balanced view of it, you would have an equal measure of all 5, which is the top line. Pretty roughly close. I didn't actually measure it, but roughly close. A, B, C, D, E. Your muscular strength, your muscular endurance, everything. So if you just said, I have a well-balanced client, or I'm a well-balanced person, and I want to just have a well-balanced program, you would have an equal amount of each, and you would spend equal time in each area. Now, on the flip side, say I have a client come in that is overweight, has a family history of heart disease, relatively strong, little bit of back pain, but everything else is relatively equal. So we'll focus on what's the main problems. They're a little bit
Sounds like
overweight.
you just described the average American.
The average American, yeah, they're a little bit overweight and in history of heart disease. Well, then I'm going to shift. So he's already pretty strong, but we want to make him healthier. Goal is not to be a powerlifter. My goal is to be healthier. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this same person with the same goal as number one, their same goal is health, but it's a different person. Now individuality comes in. I'm going to spend a little less time on strength, but I'm going to spend a little more time on the cardiovascular health, body composition. So cardiovascular, body composition, I'm going to spend more time on those two things. So we'll center their program around improving cardiovascular health and targeting their diet while maintaining their strength, maintaining their flexibility, and all of these other things. We're still going to address them, but it's more of a maintenance level on that part. So your dose response is a little different versus if I want to improve their strength. Your sets and reps are going to be different because I want to keep their heart rate up a little bit, that kind of stuff. So I can shift my training style to include it all, but for the exact plan, or with the goal is different. So say someone comes in and bucket list is run a marathon. They're well-rounded individuals, so obviously a normal well-rounded person isn't going to be able to go out and run 26 miles. So we would have to shift that again, adding a little bit more slowly over time, adding more cardiovascular training, maybe a little diet intervention to get their weight down, because a lighter body isn't going to be able to move over time. But I still want to spend time on strength, because that and muscle endurance and all that, because that structure around your joints is going to be protective as you run. And if you have the strength, if you don't have the strength to propel your body forward, obviously you're gonna have to work harder to do so. So we want to maintain those as much as possible. Although the more we shift towards the cardiovascular, the more negative effect you might have on those others, but you can still mitigate that negative effect while increasing the other if you still include them in the program. So what I do is I start with the 5-point even and then shift things around for my client or their goal, versus just saying, oh, they want to run a marathon, here's your marathon running program. Or, oh, you want to lose weight, here's a 1,200 calorie diet.
Yeah, and the important thing to note there, I feel, is that none of those blocks ever go away. You adjust them, but they never go away, because you want to you need to optimize overall health within whatever the goals are that you're trying to achieve. And this is something that I've told people, and I've told clients, and probably why I'm a terrible salesman, but I've just told people straight up, look, you can boil down the fitness goals of almost everyone to, I want to look better naked. All right. Well, I can give you aesthetics, and I can do it to the detriment of your health, but I'm not going to do that. One, because I just ethically don't think it's right. But two, you're going to get better aesthetic results if you have better overall health, especially because you're going to be able to maintain that longer. What is the career of a power lifter or a bodybuilder? Eventually that breaks down, and some of those people don't look so good when they're done, because they didn't keep overall health really in mind. Because we talked about, because there's was it on Netflix or Prime? I don't remember, the Ronnie Coleman documentary. And I kind of feel sorry for him because he's hobbling around so much. And you made the point of, well, he chose that, and he did. He chose.
He wouldn't take it back for the world.
And he wouldn't take it back because he was a 4 or 5-time Mr. Olympian. He won it like
6.
Yeah, he in a row too. He won a lot of them, and in a row. and he destroyed his body doing it. So
Mhm.
if your primary goal, even if you want to be healthier, but if you're really looking at aesthetics too, which is what most of us are, that's going to be a more sustainable long-term goal if you make sure you balance that health, especially when you start to hit 40 plus.
Well, and I'm going to make 2 points on your aesthetics there, because it goes back to the dose response. So knowing that there's a dose response, you cannot outwork a bad diet.
Mhm.
Uh, just saying, I'm going to add 2 hours of running a week, unless you were detrimental in your cardiovascular training to begin with, it is not going to help you. It is only going to hurt you.
Mhm.
And so once you hit that downward slope on the dose response, one or both of two things happen. Either you're going to increase your chance of being injured, or you're going to act to the detriment of one of those other variables, which in turn increases your chance of being injured. So if you don't get injured right off the bat, you're ultimately working back towards that injury or that negative health outcome as a result. So you just lace on the shoes and you add 3 hours of running a week, but you don't have significant muscular strength, you're eventually going to have bad knees or a bad low back. If you don't address the diet issue and you just try to work harder and harder and harder and harder, your body will eventually break. Especially if you're overweight to begin with, because you're pounding those knees, you're pounding those feet, you're pounding that low back that's holding that is getting the shear force from your belly being forward. So the balanced approach is slower for most people, unless you're just completely raw and sedentary to begin with. The balanced approach is slower, but it always has the better long-term result. Again, we're throwing out extreme goals, like entering a powerlifting competition or something like that. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to put in there for that, just to not get too crazy with it. One of the other important, now let me keep with the shifting. When I work with my athletes, those windows there, I drew 5 for the five elements of fitness, physical fitness, but I do it with my athletes too. So if I take, say, my pitchers, baseball pitchers specifically, well, you have an off season. And so when we do things in training phases, where we build one phase onto the next, onto the next, and onto the next, and they have a different focus for different reasons. And all of these different variables we manipulate within those phases have different outcomes on the body. And they're all important. Like I said, we don't throw out any of the boxes. We just emphasize one or the other. And a good example, and this is where this example I'm using for baseball is a good template for anybody that's starting training. Okay, so we'll have our body prep phase. I call it the body prep phase. We're training for harder training, and it's your higher rep sets. It's your shorter rests. It's a lot of volume. It's good for building your muscle and tendon density, which is important for injury prevention. Your muscular endurance is probably your primary training variable there. I'll work on cardiovascular endurance to some degree in there, not a whole lot, but there's a lot of reasons why, but mainly because that's the easiest variable to train. And so and it's also the easiest to lose. So what we can do is we can kind of maximize our time by tacking that on to the preseason. But for general fitness, I'd say put a little bit more time in that than I do with my athletes. But you start with your body prep. Again, higher reps, higher sets, muscular endurance. This is where you chase the burn. I say lighter weight, but I manipulate that down the line with advanced athletes to where we're actually doing high reps with a lot of load and the volume load is high. And I think that's important, but we're starting from scratch. So body prep. Then we go into a muscle building phase. So I'm going to take this baseball player and basically bulk them up. Now, when you do that naturally, you don't get the size of a bodybuilder. You're just adding muscle density. So now we've
Yeah.
spent
But
time.
bulking up, don't be scared of the term. Bulking up doesn't
Mhm,
mean you look bulky,
mhm.
okay? Unless your diet is crap, bulking up doesn't mean you look bulky.
And diet is key, and we'll go back to that. We'll come back around to that. So body prep, muscle tendon density, muscle endurance, building, reducing injury down the road. Muscle endurance, again, muscular strength together. We're always working things like range of motion and stuff like that. But then what we call a hypertrophy phase, which is we're focusing on building the muscle. And we've already focused on building the tendons and the connective tissue around them. And they're going to still benefit during this other phase too. So we've spent basically twice the time doing the connective tissue. And now we're focusing on the muscle. And then we move to a strength. If we have time, we go a strength, and then we turn that strength to power. So we're adding a speed element to it. And so that would be an ideal baseball offseason. Now, granted, with the professional athletes, you only got about 4 months to do it. So it's about a month each phase if you have a perfectly balanced individual. So now back to our shifting. So when I get an individual athlete that has a certain glaring weakness, maybe I get somebody that come to me because they have a long history of injuries. They can throw the ball 99 miles an hour, for 80 pitches, but at the end of the season, they're broken every year. Well, what I see I'm going to do, I'm going to shift that window for that injury prevention phase. In one off season, they're not going to lose the ability to throw 99 miles an hour unless they completely break and atrophy. So I'm going to shift that window and maybe spend 6 weeks instead of 4 on that injury prevention, or even do the 4, add a little muscle, add a little strength, go back to the injury prevention phase for another 3 or 4 weeks, and then go on to power. So I can shift that window of focus to, okay, so let's fix this problem, but still work on the other things that you need to perform well. Or if, go ahead.
And in the general population, I think where that's going to come into play is you're probably going to need to spend more time in that body prep phase if you're kind of just starting out, whether because you're a desk jockey. Just don't think I used to be athletic in high school, so I'm just going to jump back into it. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to have to spend more time in that body prep phase in order to get those better long-term results we're talking about. Or if you're someone who's always been pretty sedentary, if you were a mathlete, not an athlete, you're going to need to spend more time in that body prep phase in order to keep from hurting yourself, or keep from getting discouraged because you're not seeing those results you want. You've got to lay that foundation.
Well, and take yourself out of the moment. One of the techniques for logical thinking is take yourself out of the current time and look at it as if you were in a different time. So you can project to the future and say, I'm going to look back at this moment where I'm maybe bored with my program, but program jumping or going too fast could end up in an injury, and my percentage is XYZ. And then go to the time in space where you're recovering from that injury and look back at your boredom. What outweighs the other? Or go back in time to where you had a different fitness result. You could barely reach down and tie your shoes because your belly was in the way, and now you can do it while only holding your breath for 10 seconds, and then or you can button that button that you couldn't before, even though you're not exactly where you want to be. Go back to that time where you weren't even there and how miserable that was. So time travel a little bit and make the better decisions. There are ways to spice it up without changing everything, tearing it all down and jumping on the next program. But
somebody on Reddit told me I needed to use muscle confusion.
Is this where I go to CrossFit?
Sure.
P90X was the marketing campaign that was muscle confusion is the key to adaptation. First of all, that statement alone is a contradiction. So muscle confusion is not the key to adaptation. Muscle confusion is the opposite of adaptation. You don't adapt to anything, you constantly change. The only thing you get good at is constantly changing things. And maybe a little bit more repertoire of different exercises because you've gone through so many. But the key to adaptation is progressive overload, which involves consistency. So this is key because one of the biggest mistakes is jumping too far too fast or not overloading at all. There's two extreme spectrums there, but it's the most common things you see. You see that guy that comes in and maxes out every day trying to get stronger. That's not progressive. Or you see that person that just picks up the pink weight every day and reps out 50 reps and says, I'm getting toned, and goes home. And they never get the muscle tone they want. So progressive overload is the key to adaptation, which means I systematically increase how much my body can do over time.
I think a good layperson definition of that is you want to continue to challenge yourself. Okay. Your workouts should not kill you, but they should not be easy.
Mm-hmm. I like to do this with my clients, but I think it's a good advice for someone doing something on their own, because you could go study Jim Wendler or Dave Tate or all these great strength coaches and get the percentages to systematically overload the way they do, which is got a lot of science behind it. It's a little rigid for me, but I like the rep range. So say I'm working muscular endurance, so it's a higher rep scheme to begin with. I'll throw out there, okay, you've got 12 to 15 reps. If you hit the high end and you feel like you could go on, then we'll add a little weight. If you can't get the 12, then you're obviously too heavy. If you're hitting that high end, but it's all you could do for that day, that's usually probably pretty optimal. And so what we do is we try to increase, maybe they hit at a given weight, 100 pounds for whatever, 100 pounds overhead press. They hit 15, set 1, 15, set 2, 12, set 3. Well, now next week we can try 15, 15, 15. And maybe even after that, they say, you know what, I hit that third 15, but I felt like I could have done 17. And so, okay, so now we've got communication going back and forth, and you can communicate in your own head. I could have done 17. That's probably about a 5% increase in weight. So I can go up a little bit, and you can systematically go up using this range.
I think one of the pitfalls of the rep range of where you can go wrong is remember, I don't remember who I got this from, but form over ego. Okay. Yeah. It needs to be a good rep. Okay. If you're doing this with the bar, but I got it out. No, that doesn't count. Take some weight off and do good reps. Okay. And then when you get to where you hit the top end of that range of a good rep, okay, and you can keep going, then you add weight.
Should I go here since I'm considered the expert? Sometimes I question effort when I see everything perfect.
Yes.
So there is a balance there. Now, you don't want to get so imperfect that you hurt yourself. Nobody, please, nobody take this as me saying start swinging up weights when you're doing bicep curls. Like it's, just try to, there's a big difference between ego lifts and feeling the struggle every once in a while where things aren't perfect. Like I said, I'd rather someone hit 15 and it start to look ugly by the end than to hit 15 and say, I could have done 5 more and go home left wanted.
And that's the tricky balance there is those last few reps should be a struggle. And your form will start to break down. You just want to be careful that your form doesn't start to break down to the degree that you're going to injure yourself.
Well, I'm going to put a little rule on that. Here's your rule. If your form breaks down on a rep, don't do any more. But it's okay that it happened that rep. That tells you at least you were doing pretty good effort. Unless you can honestly evaluate in your head that it broke down, but that was a lack of focus or that was a one-time thing. Or I see what happened, I can resist it the next time.
Especially if you are like a lot of us, somebody who has chronic pain or mobility issues because you spend too much time here sitting. So the other day I did drop sets on my squats for the first time in forever. And the last set I was doing, I did 1 rep and then I stopped because I felt a little pop in my knee and I said, nope, I'm done. Okay, that's good enough. I'm burnt out. My form is breaking down to where I felt something in my gimpy knee start to get gimpy, so I'm done. Do you have COVID brain fog or what's going on
No,
here?
no, this was just mind in too many directions because we could go. There's so many ways you can go with this because we don't want to give the bad impression that we're not. You can't be a form Nazi.
Yeah,
That's where I want to go. But I also don't want to give the impression that everything goes.
right. So if you get into Eric Cressey as one of your sources, this is something he talks about is like if you sign up for his email newsletter or he sends you good articles every once in a while, the first thing he'll send you is his how to deadlift better is I think what it's called or something to that effect. And he talks about this and he shows examples with himself that when he's maxing out, when he's putting on a heavy load, like a 1 to 3 rep load, his form's going to break down and he'll show you, oh, look, I got a little rounding here. This isn't perfect, but it's not imperfect enough that I'm going to hurt myself, and I'm pushing a lot of weight. Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be a form Nazi. It's something I would say is I
Well,
thought of when
okay.
you were
Let me interrupt here.
okay.
When you're new, you have to be more of a form Nazi than
Yes.
when you're very experienced,
I
because
think
the part of the process is learning your body, not in a individuality sense like we talked about earlier,
mhm,
but what it feels like when you're in danger,
yes.
what it
I
feels
think that's
like.
that's the point six. I think that's where that comes in, that
Mhm.
you've added that mental part of it. That I mean, the reason you've only got 5 blocks in there is because that 6 should be with every element,
Mhm.
and I think that takes the most time.
Mind-body connection is one of the biggest detriments in the modern human body,
Mhm.
because people are not aware of where their body is in space. And part of that is our lifestyle. We sit all the time. So we've got things what they call glute amnesia, where you're you if you can't flex one of your butt cheeks independent of any other movement, then you probably have no business deadlifting yet. Uh, because chances are you're lifting with your hamstrings and low back versus your butt muscles, your glute muscles as the primary mover, which they should be. They're the most uh, robust structure in your body when it comes to musculature. Hopefully, if they're not, then you're training wrong, but or you're living wrong. But that should be the prime mover of anything that extends your hips, i.e., standing up at the hip level. And so if you can't do that, then you have a serious lack in mind body connection. If you can't feel where you are in space, when I did flight training before the NASA studies, one of the best explanations of what we call proprioception, which is knowing your body in space, spaces and spatial awareness, not spaces in outer space, but was, she said, this is proprioception. Normally, I know my arm is here. I still know my arm is here. And most people lose that connection. They can't feel where their body is in space. You see it a lot. They'll start they want to loosen up. So they flail around and whack their arm on something because they have no spatial awareness. So that's key. That's part of the mind body connection and what I was talking about with the mental state. One of the most important parts. But so that's the difference on form. If you have no mind body connection at this point, then you need to be meticulous on your form. And the other part is, while you're doing that, you need to be paying attention to what you're doing. You need to be focused on the task and say, oh, you're doing a squat with a stick on your back. You better feel when that squat was good, when you got out of your comfort zone, when you hit depth. You need to be able to feel depth. What is tight on you that is preventing you from getting where you want to go? Because we go back to the mobility part of it. Some people can reach down and touch their toes with no problem, but can't squat properly because the tensor fascia in the front of the hips is too tight or something like that. So start paying attention to where the tightness occurs. At what depth do you feel like you lose strength? You know, all of those things, and start building those brain body connections, because it's a physiological thing as well as just a focus. But you need to focus to create the physiological change that allows you to feel that.
Because if something feels wrong, the odds are it is wrong, and you need to be able to evaluate why. Okay. So one of the things that stupid box gym drives me crazy that I see a lot of.
I'm going to say this from a professional standpoint too. You need to understand why, even if you have a professional like me, because you have to be able to communicate that to me. Because you could do something that looks perfect and still hurt yourself. And all I have is the visual. So you have to be able to communicate that to me. And if you have a trainer, if you do hire a trainer and they don't communicate with you at that level respectfully, and expect the same from you, then they're just taking your money. Okay. Back to the box gym before I interrupted you.
Box gym that drives me crazy. And when I first started and I worked at a box gym, I saw another trainer. This is the closest I've ever come to interfering with another trainer, is when I saw them coaching this, and it drove me crazy. I assume this is something dumb that came from Instagram. I don't know why. All right. Leg press. How many of you ladies are doing this where you cock yourself sideways and you start pushing the leg press? How do you not feel that feels wrong? Honestly, your spine is contorted, your hips are tight, your knee is doing something funky. How do you not feel that that's wrong? And then take a step back and say, all right, I saw some person on Instagram or Reddit or whatever doing this, telling me to do it, but it feels weird. Why?
Because their legs are burning. Their butt is burning.
So ask why, and then ask, is there a way I could adjust this to where it would be done safely and comfortably? If not, is there something else I could do that would give me the effect, but healthier?
Yeah. Well, it's difficult. I'll say it's difficult because we're as a population, again, nobody knows everything. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's no this. We're entering a couple generations of people that didn't develop an awareness of their own bodies through the natural means. They're not allowed to play independently, and well, you know, nobody allows rough play anymore. Everything, if you have activity that involves competition anymore, it is organized sports, and that ain't it. Because learning how to throw a baseball or swing a bat or run with a soccer ball between your legs is not natural movement. Whereas getting together with your neighborhood friends and playing a game of tag is, or you know, you and your brother wrestling around on the floor is natural movement. All this artificial movement is being seen as the answer, and it's not. And the other part is just in between artificial movements, there's nothing but iPad time and phone time and what we call screen time. So we're entering a day and age where we're getting generations of less and less and less proper physical activity. Again, back to the mental part, proper mental activity. That game of tag taught that kid more about socialization than any social emotional learning program that any school has ever presented. And the reason those programs have to exist right now is because we don't let kids play unsupervised together anymore. So So we're anti-fragile, to steal Nassim Taleb's terminology there. It's the best. We get better with stress if it's the proper stress. And natural play between kids is the proper stress to socialize and create a physical environment if you allow them to play physically without structured rules. Let them come up with the rules. That's how they socialize. But we're entering a stage where what you talked about with the sideways on the thing, their exposure to fitness is what they saw on Instagram. That's it. They think it's right, and if it feels wrong for them, this is the knee-jerk mental reaction: is I must be out of shape.
No pain, no gain.
It must be because I'm not as in good a shape as that person, which is why I'm feeling weird. Not because it's a contorted position that may be not proper for my flexibility level or my strength level, or even just ridiculous to begin with. I hate poo-pooing on exercises though, because a lot of times when I see this, and here's one we brought up Cressey earlier. I'm gonna take a negative direction there. Is he put an article about 7 or 8 years ago out on how dips are bad. And I want to, if I ever meet him at a conference or something, I want to ask him, hey, do you regret that article? Because what he did was describe a improperly done dip on why it's bad, and then why a lot of people have trouble doing them properly. And that's why it's bad, when no real human movement is bad. If you can't do it right, that's a sign. And so I'll use big, giant movements like that, dips, pull-ups, push-ups, that should be normal human movement. And if somebody has trouble with it, that's an evaluation for me.
Yes.
Why could that person not do a push-up without their elbows flaring up overhead? Was it a weakness? Was it a flexibility issue? Was it a little bit of A and B? Is their core dropping down? Everything. So, okay, so we'll pull back from push-ups for now. But if I see something they can't do, it's not a eliminate scenario. It's a, what do I need to do to get them to where they can do that? Because it's normal human movement. Again, aside from an injury or something like that, fused vertebra or something like that, that's going to prevent a movement. But in a normal situation, if they can't do a movement, it's a sign.
Yes. And to that point, I'd say if you can't, I mean, if you really can't do a movement, don't force it. And the reason I was being cranky and shouting out no pain, no gain is because I hate that phrase. No, pain is almost always, like, real pain is your body saying something's wrong. Okay. So something's wrong here. What you want is discomfort. No discomfort, no gain. Okay. Like you're the as you said, the person who goes in there and picks up the pink weights and does 50 reps and then says, okay, I'm done. Were you ever really in any discomfort? Because if you're not in discomfort, you're not progressing. So why are you wasting your time? But on the other hand, if you're hurting, you need to stop and you need to figure out why.
A basic example would be reaching for a stretch. If I can't touch my toes, I want to get to where I can touch my toes. Well, I'm going to add a little bit of stretch I'm going to stretch to discomfort until that discomfort extends a little bit. And then I extend the discomfort until eventually I'm touching my toes with maybe just slight discomfort. But if I can't touch my toes and I say, Heath, push my back down until my fingers touch my toes, and there's a physiological reason, not just a neurological reason. Well, scratch that, because the neurological reason is physiological too. But if there's a major reason why I can't, a tissue issue that I can't, you're going to rip that tissue. And this is where the nervous system comes in. So what people don't understand about flexibility is most of your flexibility improvements have nothing to do with the tissue stretching itself. It's the nervous system response to the stretch. So what happens when you reach a point in your stretch, you have sensors in the muscle that cause a contraction if it feels in danger. And so you teach that system to allow you to go further before it feels in danger. By progressively giving your muscle cells a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy of comfort as you go forward till you can get to where you need to go. And obviously, as everything else, there's a dose response. We don't need to become contortionists to be healthy. In fact, at that point, there's a lot of issues that go along with it.
All right, well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. And as kind of wrap up, I would point out that it occurs to me that we said we were going to talk about programming and we didn't tell you to do, 3 sets of 15 RDLs and 3 sets of TID to bench press and on Monday and then on Wednesday, because there's more to and more basic fundamental parts of programming than your exercises and your sets and your reps. Because when you go digging around on the internet for a program, that's what you're going to find is you're going to find, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you do these exercises at these sets and reps. And okay, well, that's the specifics, but why are you doing those things on those days? And is that what is most optimal for you? If it is, great, go do it. But first things first, you need to evaluate yourself and figure out where you kind of sit within these 5 blocks.
Yeah, we can go into more detail. You can go into as much detail as you want. I'm going to give the simple template, and I alluded to this earlier. And I am going to speak in sets and reps here. So do 3-month program and repeat. And you start 1 month high rep, 15 to 20 reps. The next month, somewhere around 8 to that's 15. And then the next month, somewhere around 5 to 8. And then repeat. Now, if you get to the end of, say, your 8 to 15s and you still feel like you can't handle a strength set, go back to number 1. But high, medium, low, back to high, medium, low. And then as far as exercise selection, this is a beginner. If you're a beginner, pick a squat movement, a pushing movement, a pulling movement, and a core exercise. And here's what I do with beginners. I do those 4 for 3 sets, high reps. Then I do another 4, same pattern, 3 sets, high reps. And then I have a second day, which is just different variations of those. And then repeat, boom, 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 2 or 3 weeks till they look prepared. And then go on to the other stuff. You can make it as easy as you want. So a squat, a push, a pull, and a core exercise. A hinge, a push, a pull, and a core exercise. Boom. There's programming 101 for the beginner. Easy as that. Anything you want to add to those?
No.
No.
I think that and just keep in mind that dose response. Don't say, okay, well, if that's good, then I'm going to do it every single day. No, hold on. You need to recover.
Yeah,
okay.
Start every other day.
Yeah.
For those that, recovery is the most overlooked principle of training. You got progressive overload, which we talked about, individuality, which we talked about, and I think is overused, specificity, which we talked about. For general fitness, it's non-specific by nature. Rest and recovery, and that's the most overlooked. But I'm going to add consistency. That's my own consistency. So have your rest and recovery, which is your day is off. Consistency in diet nutrition. That's another one. So we're again, beginner advice: eat less crap. Easy enough.
We know what's bad for you, and we like it because it's bad for us. It gives us that nice serotonin boost, and we like it. But we know it's bad for us. So.
So I'm going to go biologist on you. It's not bad for us. It's bad for us. It's too available to us because it's good for us if we don't eat every day.
Well, when we were growing up, we had Mountain Dew and moon pies at McDonald's, but we didn't have it every day for every meal.
Yep. All right. So get up, move follow that pattern if you're getting started. I guess I have no excuse but to now that I'm figuring out this web stuff to get my Real Fitness web page going.
Haha.
So once I get that going and published, I will link it. So other than that, anything to sign off?
Nope, I'm gonna go do things now.
Yeah, well, I was gonna squat after this, but we went long and I have clients at 4, so in 20 minutes. So I guess I have to work out at night. I don't like working out at night, but
That's because we're old.
well, because we were talking about nutrition earlier, it's because I fast and I usually don't have my first meal till after workout. So I have to make the choice now. Do I eat something now and feel sluggish during my workout, which is my typical
Mhm.
feeling after eating, or do I go ahead and extend my fast till like 7 o'clock tonight? So I think I'm going to extend it. But,
Because we're
all right.
old now. Get off our lawns and go away.
All right. Talk to you later, Heath.